Well, hello and welcome to the Photo Brigade podcast. I'm Robert Kaplan. Today I have my friend Misha Friedman. Friedman. Oh, I got it right the first time. I'm sorry. Misha Friedman. How you doing, Misha?
Good to meet you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Misha and you and I met when we were going to see Robert Frank down in the East Village, was it? Or in the village for his annual birthday group portrait and everything, and we thought it would be fun to just kind of catch a glimpse of the legend documentary photographer. So, like him, you are also a documentary photographer based here in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
You are originally from Moldova.
I am.
And the former Soviet Union, you were just telling me. And so I want to talk to you about your career. You've put out a bunch of books. We've got one of them here, which I believe is your latest book. This is on, it's called The Idealists. And tell me a little bit what it's about.
So it's about the role of women in police reform in Ukraine.
The role of women in police reform in Ukraine. So we're going to go through the photos of this, and you can also get Misha's books. Where are they? I got one of yours on Amazon.
I think Amazon is the easiest.
Amazon is the place to go get these. So anyway, before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to Adorama and the event space. Thank you for letting us use your event space to record our podcast and do our events. Also to Tenba Bags and to Canon Professional Services for all the support. You guys are the best. Thanks so much. All right, Misha. So let's talk about your life. Like, when did you get into photography? I know you've put together a nice little slideshow that might bring us through your life a bit. Let's talk about it. Let's look at your pics and talk about your career path.
Sure. Well, I, like most people, had a camera kind of growing up, and had a camera, not had a camera, never studied photography like most people.
Right.
It was a hobby when I was in my 20s. And then I through my work, befriended in my previous life, before photography, befriended some photographers, spent some time with them, saw what they did and what they didn't do. And in my early 30s, basically decided that bad day taking pictures was way better than going to work.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Isn't that the truth?
So I decided to give it a try.
So some of these photos that we're looking at now are from your early days, yeah?
Right. So I used to work for medical nonprofit organizations as a project manager, such as Doctors of the World, Doctors Without Borders. So when I first got into photography, I did the only thing I knew in photography, which was kind of public health studies, because I felt that at least then I could probably do a better job than most people. Mm-hmm. And it's what I had access to and what I knew, and so it was kind of a natural extension to being able to combine some of the skills that I had that maybe were unique in my case.
Right.
Yeah.
When did you, like, in terms of getting the skills down to be a photographer, were you self-taught? Did you, like, how did you go about it?
Yeah. Well, in this sense, I got a bit lucky where, since I never studied photography, as I was kind of transitioning into this work, I'm a photographer. Mm-hmm. I'm a professional, whatever that means. Also, technology was becoming easier. Mm-hmm. So I luckily didn't have to start from complete scratch. I mean, I was like on that wave of people where, okay, digital, you see results of what you do right away and you can correct it, and it's maybe not as painful as it once was. And the barriers for entry were easier. What I did do to learn, and it was, I got myself a digital Leica.
Which is an amazing camera.
Which was an amazing camera, but it was also a completely manual camera. So it forced me essentially to learn everything, because I think the challenge when you decide that you want to learn photography and you get one of those advanced SLR computers, that do everything for you. It's so easy to just put everything in automatic or semi-automatic mode and then just not learn. I knew that with digital rangefinder, I had no choice.
Right, that's true.
So like just banging my head against the Leica M8 was my formative years in my education.
Also, the Leica M8 was like the first Leica digital, right?
Yeah.
And that was sort of I don't know, a pain because it was so slow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I remember it being kind of like the original Nikon D1s, where it's like you'd look at the back of the screen and it would be unrendered, and then it'd take 2 or 3 seconds to actually.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. The number of times I ended up driving to Allendale in New Jersey to have something fixed and replaced is like beyond me.
But now you're rocking an M10, right?
I'm rocking an M10. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Good.
So that was my That was my technical education. But I do want to say that, as with technology, since technology becoming easier and more accessible, there's less value these days, as it should, and that's exciting about like what camera do you have and what brand or what lenses. It's about ideas, and I do think that my ideas, like the education for like where to get ideas, what can be done, was formed way before I decided in my head that I'm all of a sudden a photographer.
Yeah.
And so the growing these I don't know, first or 10 years have also been about not just learning about aperture and shutter speed, but also understanding what can and cannot be photographed. Because often, I think when you have people like who are older and getting into photography, they get these wild, complicated, sophisticated ideas, but they often don't have, and I was that, I didn't have either the skills to execute these ideas or simply didn't realize that these things can't be done, because photography is an interesting medium, but it's far from ideal for a lot of the questions that you might want to explore, for which you need other mediums like words and audio and video. And it takes, no one can explain that to you at home. It takes a while to really understand and learn like what skill set do you have, and what can you do with it, and what just simply has to be tweaked and adjusted or just dropped altogether just because photography is not a good medium for it.
Right, absolutely. So I want to switch our concentration onto some of the photos here. I'm going to start back at the beginning here. Let me just go back to the beginning here. All right, so tell me about how you got in, these various projects that we're looking at, all right? And sort of bring me through that career path.
So my last couple of jobs for Doctors Without Borders, I happened to focus a lot on tuberculosis. So I worked either in logistics or project management or infection control. So I had access, I knew the disease, I knew I could do a good job. So when I did become a photographer, and I was very fortunate enough early on to secure a couple of grants and awards, I went back to the people I knew, to the activists I knew in the field, and photographed what I knew. So these black and white pictures that you see are from tuberculosis wards in Uzbekistan, Ukraine, Russia, and a little bit later in South Africa, around like Western Cape.
I see. And I know they're all black and white. Were you shooting digital then, or were you shooting actual film?
I was shooting digital. I
just decided that this project.
I decided that like the subject of tuberculosis kind of commands it. Plus, I think color photography is, in my personal opinion, a lot harder than black and white.
Right.
And I just didn't have either the skills or the confidence to control color composition. And when you're shooting kind of documentary work, you want to tell stories you want to focus on emotional moments and with good composition, and you can't say, well, color composition isn't right here, I'm not going to use that image.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't want color to interfere with the way what I was doing. Yeah.
And you said that you got a grant to do this. So do you work with a lot of grants? Is that how you?
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, it was mostly like awards from like competitions that I don't think they exist anymore. But I try to, like, I've been working with the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting a lot, and I've been very lucky to have received 6 or 7 kind of grants from them in the last 5 years, maybe, maybe longer. Time flies.
So this is a story. Tell me about this story.
Yeah. So as I was doing that tuberculosis work, the one thing that no one kind of bothered to explain to me, that if you're pro, you will have a reputation. And I realized, in the first couple of years, that editors or potential clients are only thinking of me as the tuberculosis guy,
right? Medical problems guy.
Yeah, and like no one wants to look at those. So and no one will like hire you to do anything else. So I was also in Ukraine. I was actually assisting a photographer, a great Norwegian photographer who I met before. We're traveling in Eastern Ukraine, and I try to then also like begin to think of like how I can incorporate some of the like my knowledge of art history or the region and make things a little bit more personal. So these coal miners were a result of that, where I took ideas from German Romanticism and tried to photograph coal miners along those themes. And why? So this is a funny picture to look at and kind of an important in my career, because I was I guess a professional photographer for maybe a year at that time, maybe less. Yeah. And this picture won I got an award from POI in portraiture for it.
Wow, nice.
So like in the same category with like Platon.
So tell me about the awards. One of those things, it's like some people, like I used to have mine submitted for me when I worked as like an intern or worked for different publications. The reason being because they submitted them for me, because I kind of found it to be stressful to look through your work and submit them, and sometimes it costs money to submit your stuff. You mentioned that this was you were a professional for about a year, and you received an award, and you've received other awards. Do you find that those have helped your career?
In the beginning, because what they do they're big tap on the shoulder. They're like, it's essentially someone who you're idolizing, who is in the jury, saying you belong, at least in your head. So when you started out as late as I did, it's 32, 33, you don't really have that. You kind of need a little bit of that confidence. The other thing that you also have a myth like in your head that awards somehow equal work,
right?
Or work will lead to business, like better business or more, which is not true,
right?
But you don't know it until it happens. You think that these medals will somehow, like, something will happen, clouds will open,
right?
Like emails will come, phone calls. It's not the case at all. But without these medals, you think that that's what it takes. So in fact, what this early recognition did for me, it liberated me from this award cycle.
Right.
Because what it does, it hampers your creativity, because you begin to shoot
for awards.
Yeah. And you start to think and like, why?
And then it's like, well, why did the last year's person win?
Yeah.
And then you start to see themes throughout.
But also, like you're in the field and you start to storyboard thinking of awards, and that's not what the story demands, and it's just something in the back of your head, and you're pulled in these different directions. I need more money, or I need more clients, I need more medals, I need this and I need that. and with that, you lose the quality, doesn't increase. So what these early awards did for me, they essentially freed me from applying. Like I haven't applied to POI in 3 or 4 years,
right?
Simply because I just don't need to.
Exactly.
Like
you've got one already. You stamped it on your resume.
I got one. I got it out of my system,
Yeah.
and I don't want to, like. But I mean, awards are also important. I think early on for another reason. They help you edit, because when you are starting out, you show your work to a bunch of friends. You put it up on the wall, you create an edit, you think it's done. Mm-hmm. It's perfect. And you don't look at it again. But you change, 6 months, a year, 2 years passes by. Mm-hmm. And if you don't look at it again, you change, and I'm sure some things could be improved. What awards do, they force you to rethink some of the editing decisions that you made years before.
Sure.
So because awards are, like some awards require 10, others 20, 15 format. They're all over. So you constantly have to rethink and reshuffle. And when you are not experienced, and very few people, I think, are good editors of their own work.
Yeah.
It's like this.
I surely am not. Yeah.
It's a forced exercise to. So that pivoting to this. So those coal miners' work, I showed them to editors in New York. Some of them remembered me, and about a year after that, I was assigned to shoot a story for The New Yorker, which was really, really scary because, first assignment for The New Yorker.
Oh, yeah, you don't want to screw it up.
And the editor just says, well, I like what you did with coal miners. Now go do the same
for ballet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's neat. I mean, you get to take your own style. And one of the things that I will see throughout your work is that I really like your framing. You always seem to have people perfectly placed a lot of times within, nice frames, whether it be between people or door frames or windows or whatever. And speaking of your awards, PDX 30.
So that was that's very early on in my professional career. So I'm doing this for not very long, and again, it's something that I've heard from friends who are pros that it took them years of trying to get into the PDN 30 and the 30 or just PDN 30, and it was kind of cool that it was the first time I was ever nominated, and it happened that very first year, and I didn't have to sweat it out.
Yeah.
But it hasn't been always like a smooth ride.
Right. But throughout these years, you started getting work for or getting your work published in. Are these assignments that you've been doing for like the New York Times here, or are they picking up your work?
Just one kind of funny anecdote about awards and competitions that I remember that year. Pretty much the same edit, same images that, like the picture that I got the POI for. Earlier that year, because the one place that I really, really wanted to go to, because I've heard it was important, was Eddie Adams, and I didn't get in. Mm-hmm. And it was really kind of funny that 6 months later, the same work that was not good enough for Eddie Adams, I got a POI for.
And that's the crazy thing.
That was
Everything's
funny.
So subjective too, because it's like you never know who's giving the awards out, and same with the.
But you don't know it. When you're starting late, you have no idea. People don't explain.
It must mean that I'm terrible or something like that.
Yeah. So, but it was good to get these things out of the system and just focus more on what I did better.
So this is pivoting now to, this is the police book, right? This is the Idealists, some of the photos from your book, which we can get on Amazon. All right. So tell me why you started this project. Was it a personal project that you started, and this is all that it's been published in?
It's not everything is kind of personal. Everything that's not commercial is, I guess, is personal. This was one of the easiest journalistic decisions that I've ever had to make. A friend who knew a lot about the upcoming reform mentioned that there's a very charismatic Georgian reformer who is coming to Ukraine after the revolution, and because of her charisma, they see a huge spike in women who want to try out for police, and women were never allowed to work in the streets, like in Soviet Union, like be in patrol.
Right.
So, like knowing that, having by that time already a little bit of experience working in journalism, I knew right away that this was a story that I wanted to pursue. It had all the elements of a potentially successful long-term project. It was a story of change. It was a positive story of change, which is rare in journalism. And it also had kind of women in uniforms and guns and in Eastern Europe. So what would I get out of it? I didn't know, but all of my kind of instincts and experience just so like, this is worth investing your time in. And so I started shooting, and I started coming, and I had kind of access, and and I developed strong relationships, and it turned out, in terms of publications, probably my most successful assignment-based work, or not just like editorial work, that I've ever had. I must have had this published in about 15 outlets, including the New Yorker, New York Times, Foreign Policy, ABC, Quartz, and a few others domestically, plus internationally.
And then this.
And then this.
And then the book.
And then the book.
So how... And you self-published this book?
I self-published this book, but I did get like a small grant to do this. But in many respects, this is a very traditional photo book, where it's not journalism pretending to be art.
Right.
It's not. This is a story, that has a beginning, and it's structured like a story, which is rare. Again, in journalism these days, where you have recruitment, and then we go through stages of training, graduation, ride-alongs, more ride-alongs, then them forming specialized units focused on domestic violence. And I do have they're now friends, women who I met when we were doing push-ups and doing tryouts.
Right, yeah.
To now like being commanders and first women to ever lead like police in like major Ukrainian towns.
So with your projects, your long-term projects, does this book mean it's done, or are you going to continue?
I continue in the sense that I'm friends with them. I don't know what that will mean in the long.
Could lead to something.
Could lead to something, but I did really feel like this book needed to be made for myself, but also for them, because it's an arch that took 3 years, and you could do ride-alongs for the next 50 years,
right.
And it will look like ride-alongs. But in terms of the most like key moments in the story, I do consider this book to be kind of a testament of this reform and a historical document. When I presented this book in Ukraine this summer, the very people who are in the book, they told me that to them this is history. Like this is something that is just it's a document to something that will never happen again, and it's an important historical document for Ukrainians.
So this is your website here, and where you can also go to your books and see the different books that you've done. So how many total do you have here?
I have 5, I believe.
Five total books. And do you feel that the most successful one was this last one, or how do you rate the success of a book? Because it's hard to sell books. That there's no doubt about that.
I think it really depends on the book. I think there's some books where they essentially become business cards.
Right.
And there are other books where the book is the final product, where it is it is from the beginning what I was set out to do, and the book format is the right format for a specific project. For the police book, for example, it only became apparent to me after a couple of years and doing all these articles that it would be important for Ukrainians, for the women in the book, if all of this work existed in a single place, like a book.
Right. Sure.
For other projects, like when I really like collaborating with writers, like a book is a natural extension of those collaborations. And so the couple of projects that I have coming up are essentially kind of that. You have, either writer writing a strong introduction, or it's really text-driven or photo-driven. And I do think that photography and bookmaking are very technical fields where that should be driven by ideas, and the sort of format that you use, film, digital, square, panorama, 3x2 digital, should be an extension and thought through depending on what do you have to say and what's the right format for. So I've done, we haven't looked much at this today, but I've done a couple of projects that were film, panoramas, very few people in it, just because that made sense for those projects.
Gotcha. And a lot of your work, it takes place in Russia or in these former Soviet Union type places. Here's another piece from the New Yorker, which is pretty nice display. Tell me a little bit about this project.
Right. So this is a project on essentially memory. It's a book that I did together with Masha Gessen. She's a National Book Award winner and a staff writer for the New Yorker, brilliant writer, and where we studied and we looked into the gulags and what they mean today. And the hypothesis for this project was that something is not really history.
And these are the panorama shots we
were talking about? These are the panoramas,
yeah.
Something is not, if it's not, something has to end for it to be called history, and just because, if you haven't really studied and understood what happened, and like in Soviet Union, there were no Nuremberg trials for the atrocities that Stalin did against his people. So you can't say that Gulag is over. And so when you look at Soviet prisons, for example, today, Russian prisons, the nameplates changed and a few things changed, but the sort of system of repression that was set up then still very much exists today. And
was this particular project that you did with the panoramas, was it for New Yorker, or was it something they picked up after the fact?
The New Yorker piece is essentially an ad for the book.
Oh, okay. So this was the book that you had put out, and then they picked it up for it.
The book was published by Columbia Journalism School. It's an imprint called Columbia Global Reports, and it was. It was kind of traditional in the sense that Masha and we had a pitch, which was picked up, and for which we've received an advance, and went out and made a book.
Gotcha.
Which was published.
Here's something else that you've been doing, which is kind of interesting on your website. There's an interactive page, and you've got two things, and this is obviously a chessboard, and it's a project that you did on chess champions?
On a chess match, yeah.
Chess match.
On a single chess match.
Sorry about that. Now, did what gave you why did you want to do this? Are you a big chess fan, or was it assigned?
I played like a good Soviet schoolboy. I played chess, and I became sort of decent at it as a kid. So when having photographed tuberculosis, I knew all about photographing things that were not very potentially visually exciting, or people, or nothing really kind of big. There were no big moments, or very few big moments to. So the kind of subjects that are visually hard, and photographing chess is not the easiest and the most obvious subject for photography. So I knew a little bit about chess. I had decent access to the top players. But again, I was thinking of what's the best way to. I think like you go to a restaurant. So like, how do you judge your experience? Not just by the food that you eat, but by also service, by also light and sound and atmosphere and design.
Mm-hmm.
So similar with photography, you'll judge images based on on the layout, based on how they're presented, on format. So with that in mind, my decisions were very, I tried to have fun with the project. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I knew chess is square, chess is black and white.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an experiment. I didn't know if it was going to succeed or not. So I said, okay, if chess is square,
Square format.
Square format.
So you're shooting with?
I'm shooting with 6x6 digital, 6x6 film, and my phone.
And your phone.
And my phone.
Nice,
So iPhone 4, I think, at the time. Then I'm shooting black and white, so that was also easy. And then I'm also the project should have 64 squares, because why not? It's a chessboard. And then in the presentation, it should be diptychs, because it should be one versus another.
Right. So each one is the competitors just throughout their life.
So I thought it through ahead of time. I had made all these decisions before the shoot.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of limited to what. And then for the final piece, I worked with a designer and a coder to create kind of a different way of displaying this.
Interesting. So you
at first, I was really hoping, and I was talking to people at Time Magazine for them to take my code and put it on their webpage, and like that, to display the project this way. They ultimately balked.
Yeah.
And just and they did a straight slideshow, and it appeared in Time and SI. But I used this and put the full project on my website.
And then another interactive piece that you have is on patriotism.
Right.
So you basically went all around to these different cities
and regions,
right? And you asked people a set of questions, which anybody can see. What are these 6 questions?
Right.
And
Russians are very sensitive to people coming from abroad, even though I was born there. And especially with a surname like Friedman, and exploring subjects like nationalism and patriotism and all of that. So I tried very hard in this project to remove myself from what people had to say. So I decided essentially to treat the project as a researcher. So I devised a set of questions, which were, these were not conversations. These were like, these are my questions, please answer them. And I tried to randomize as much as I could. There are no famous people, there are no celebrities, there are no other journalists, so I didn't kind of cheat.
Right.
These are not public people. And I knew that I wanted to present. I didn't want to, the reason why, for example, this project didn't become a book was because in a book format, you make decisions, right? What goes in the book, what photograph you like, what photograph you don't like. And that then becomes your vision, your idea of what Russian patriotism is. This format of a database allows for neutrality and impartiality, because every single person I interviewed is here. And this was not easy as a photographer, because I had to include all the pictures I didn't like too.
Right.
So their answers are in full. You could hear their voice.
It's neat. You can go by location, by questions, by generation. So you can literally, see what these particular people's answers to these particular questions and these particular age range.
And even within these data sets, the sets are randomized. So not one or two opinions dominate, because no one will scroll or see full sections till the very end. It will always be a selection.
Yeah.
Again, I tried to treat it like imagined if I was a sociologist or an anthropologist of some kind. And
well, we got some people on Facebook, our Facebook page. Angel Franco says thanks for talking about the contests, because obviously we everyone sort of thinks a certain way about the contest. Got Julie and Meryl saying thank you. Your use of shapes and tones are amazing, and hearing about your approach. So I think that it's sort of interesting, talking to you about your approach, and especially as we get into the more scientific stuff. When I was in school, we were talking earlier about school, because I went to Ohio University to study photojournalism, and we were talking about lighting, and did they teach you that, and did they teach you how to talk to celebrities, because I do celebrity portraiture. Well, one of the interesting things in the documentary class that we did, or that I had taken, is we was talking about the different forms of documentary. There's one end that's like evidentiary photography, like a police photographer that shoots crime scenes. That's a documentary photographer, but very literal. Like, this is, to document what things are where. And then there's the other, that's one end of the spectrum, and then the other end of the spectrum is something totally different.
Well, and that's what you learn in the field, and more you get into this business, is there's a way you shoot fact. Let's say you shoot for a daily newspaper. You're not there to present. You're photographing what's in front of you. It's a different way you shoot, I think, for a magazine, where you both have to shoot what's going on, especially if it's an event, but also kind of reaction of other people to the fact.
Yeah.
And then there is the more maybe personal level, where you're not really so much interested in fact. You're observing how other people are observing what's going on, but your ultimate goal is to present your own opinion of what others think when they're observing events.
Right. Exactly.
And within the kind of documentary tradition, or just photography in general, I think there are people who are great at all three of those approaches. And not one approach is better or worse than another. I think what has been important for me is to know what am I doing there and what is my goal in each particular situation, because I have been in all three, where my role has been to go straight with what I'm seeing, and that's more of a kind of maybe Wire, AP Reuters sort of approach. And I've also photographed for magazines. And I've also been in situations like the police book, where there's a lot going on, but very early on I decided that is going to be my own interpretation and take on what I'm seeing.
And we've already seen some of your tear sheets, but here's some more. So you've worked with Human Rights Watch?
Actually, this is funny, because I took this picture when I was still working with Doctors Without Borders, before I was a photographer, but this was inside the military base in western Ukraine, and these are migrants. Like, no journalist would ever be allowed there, and I think I was showing my work, or I forget how they came across my work, but it was one of my very first publications, and it became a cover of a Human Rights Watch report about 7 or 8 years before migrant story really exploded, and people kind of didn't really knew or cared that much about African migrants coming to Europe on that scale. Yeah.
What do you think is one of your most prestigious or favorite clips, or would you say
publications?
Tear sheets? Publications, or where it's been published?
I think just like with winning that medal from POY was liberating. For me, doing that New Yorker piece was the same for journalism.
For the ballet?
For the ballet.
Yeah.
Because, New Yorker is a magazine that as a New Yorker I subscribe, because it was a really difficult assignment.
A lot of reading in that.
It's a lot of reading. Well, when you're a photographer, there's a lot of downtime. So
that's true.
So, I got to work with the editor-in-chief. It was a complicated assignment. And what it did for me, because I think when you're starting out, you always feel like there are a lot of people in the industry who know, like, potential clients or clients who they know where you stand as an up-and-coming, whatever, emerging. And you're often you're taking advantage of that, because people always try to get more from you than that they give back or pay you. And when it's in the one thing that you have in the back of my head, you have in your back of your head is, well, I think I need this, so I'll agree to kind of crappy deal, because I haven't reached that point, this cover or that magazine or this person, if you want to photograph this celebrity, and you keep taking bad deals, and you sometimes feel like you in retrospect that your editors take advantage of you because they know that you're kind of insecure about your standing, in that regard. So doing that shoot to me, but for me, kind of an assignment for the New Yorker and a spread in the New Yorker, the way it came out, that was kind of the absolute pinnacle in terms of what I could possibly do in terms of as a journalist. I could repeat it. It would be great if I had more of those, but no cover of no magazine will impress me more than that assignment.
Yeah.
And that relaxes you.
Yeah.
Because that relaxes you when you then talk to other potential clients and they know that you're not like your knees are not kind of, you're not shaking, in your boots, and you would like to get certain work, but it's not because you think it will enhance your portfolio.
Sure.
And I think people are often they sense that security. So with this difficult assignment, because I've never shot backstage before, I never shot ballet before. I had to figure out what to do, and I didn't have access much to the writer or the story. So it was like, it was a challenge, but it was also liberating because, like I've worked with top magazines before, and I believe that successful completion of that assignment made it infinitely easier for me to then negotiate better rates, better conditions,
absolutely,
or than before.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Julie Johnson on Facebook here asks if you can comment on when, as a photographer, you became part of the story. She's a native Californian in a fire area, sort of how to balance objectivity with feelings.
Well, I don't think there's you strive towards objectivity, but everything in life is subjective. So because that's me, that's my education, that's my, the way you frame, what you photograph, what you don't photograph. I think what you have to demonstrate spam. Someone from spam from California. But you have to demonstrate that you strive, that objectivity is your goal, that you make everything, kind of every effort to, to be objective. As for, I've been lucky where I've had a couple of situations where my work did make a difference. Where, for example, about 5 years ago, I did a lot of work on LGBT issues in Russia when that was kind of big in 2013, 14, before the Olympic Games. And I photographed Dmitry, who lost an eye to kind of a hate crime in St. Petersburg. And when he came to US, that work was used, that story ran in Politico. And what was cool was, I don't know, so when he became legal and was allowed to work in US, he was hired by Politico to be a computer programmer for them. So that was kind of neat and doesn't happen very often, but it was kind of great to see that like work makes a difference, not in a kind of an abstract giving voice sort of way to people who don't have a voice, because that's maybe nice, but it's not very often that actually that makes a difference to the very person you're photographing. But when you actually see kind of a young person to whom like my work actually helped get a job,
right? Sure.
And who was an asylum seeker, and so like have stories like that, and but you try to be as neutral, as objective as you can, and because that is essentially part of journalism. And
was this the project you were just talking about?
no, this is different. This is the recent the picture that you're looking at. This is from Nigeria, shot earlier this year. It was for a story that ran in Science magazine. That about HIV, and which we did in Florida, Nigeria, and Russia, and the story ran in June or July, and it was kind of cool. It was a cover plus like 16 pages
wow.
inside, and the cover was important and interesting and a little bit controversial, but it worked out really well.
So as we sort of close out this podcast, I have two sort of further questions. Well, one would be about I know from us talking, we saw each other at our monthly Beer and Wings, and we were talking about our kids and family and all this kind of stuff. It seems like a lot of these projects take you away from home a lot. Do you find difficulty about, I mean, the type of work that you do and the travel? Is it difficult for you? Like,
sure.
What's the?
Well, I think main thing coming from my previous lives working for various corporations to being a photographer is, you're a small business owner, and I think what I've learned over the years is one of the most important things is time management, and. When you're starting out, you spend way too much time on contests and things that other people do and may not necessarily be, things that are very time consuming. The one thing that when you grow into this job, and also when you have a family, makes you much more aware and conscious and focused on time. So what I've made a rule for myself, when I do go, it's for never longer than 2 weeks. So every couple of weeks. I mean, I'm never away for more than 2 weeks. There are minor exceptions, but I've always under a month. And as I've shared with you, what works for me in photography, especially long-term projects, I like to think things through before I do. So the being in the field part is the least time-consuming part of the job, in the sense that the more I think things through at home, the sort of equipment that I need, format, what I want to say, what I don't want to say, what's important to this story, assignment, project, whatever, the easier then it has become for me in the field, and that has been so far my kind of hack into how to try to balance and still be kind of very much a present for your family, and but also do this kind of job it's a job, but again, it's better than going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And then separately, you have recently just gotten on it was Reportage by Getty. Can you talk about that?
I was with a small French agency called Cosmos for about 7 years, run by an incredible Annie Boula, who has just announced her retirement, and kind of that essentially forced the agency to close. And so I began to look for a new home, and when I started out, photography, Reportage, and Getty meant kind of that was one of the top places. These are the sort of kind of people I looked up, and so I had some professional contacts at Getty, and I reached out to them. And
so what does it mean for you, do you think?
I think it's professional. Well, it is. I mean, it is kind of a humbling recognition that maybe I should kind of continue to do what I do. professionally, I think it's very early to say. I think we need to come back in a year and ask, because it is, Getty is a business. My photography is a job. Will this partnership, this representation, what will that mean in terms of paycheck and my taxes?
We'll have to have you back on in a year and see what happens. Right?
These relationships takes a while.
Yeah.
They need to understand more about me. I need to understand more about them.
Yep.
Then
it's a new business move.
It's a business move, and this is not a relationship that should be it's like, I feel like a politician who was just elected.
Yeah.
It's like, well, let's do, and you often see, like, in journalism, well, let's do a story about this person. Well, there's not much to do yet.
Yeah.
Let's give this person 6 months and see how it's working out. So give me a year, and I'll say, how's it going? For the moment, I'm excited.
Yeah.
It's an honor, considering all the great photographers and editors who have worked with Getty or are still at with Getty.
Sure.
And
There's amazing people.
And I look forward to hopefully getting to know them better.
So last question, because it just came in under the wire. This is from my friend Dairo. He lives in Colombia, and he was actually my fixer when I was on a New York Times assignment down there. I don't know, it's been about 10 years, hasn't it been, Dairo? Anyways, he says sometimes journalists or photographers become the center of news or the work besides the main object of the assignment. Recently, there's a worldwide debate about ethics, laying especially upon with whom a photographer journalist should not take pictures with. Can you tell us more about it or give us any advice?
Sure. I think I've been lucky where my previous, having worked for Doctors Without Borders, have kind of prepared me well for this job, like the ethics of, at least when it comes to public health and understanding what's okay and definitely not okay. My only advice would be that if you have doubt, don't do it. Because if you're gonna jeopardize, no picture is kind of worth someone's life.
Right.
Or someone's life being worse off than it was before.
Yeah.
So if you have doubts, think before you do. Of course, it's not easy, and people change their minds often, and there's that just comes from experience. But try not kind of be honest with people, and I think people sense that when you work for bigger publications or longer term projects, and you're working with vulnerable groups of people, if possible, get consent forms. I highly recommend using there's an app called Easy Release, which I think it's called Easy Release, which is great because
for model releases.
Because it's weird carrying around stacks of papers, but it's a lot easier to have an app, which is kind of an amazing app. Because I've been in situations where just a release, can I use your pictures? Yes, was good enough. A verbal release was enough for, let's say, for something to run in the Times. But when it came to publishing books, a publisher would not touch sensitive images.
Interesting, yeah.
Especially of children, without such releases. So if you had thought it through and you think that work has potential, or definitely is going to be a part not in a self-published book, but in a proper publishing house, they will need releases.
Yeah, better safe than sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's not always possible. Someone is dying and you're there, and it's already intrusive enough, and you're not gonna stick an iPhone into somebody's face and say, "Well, sign this." Yeah. So you have to try to use common sense, and because our reputation is the only thing we have. I mean, we're doing this show at Adorama. Anyone could come in here and get the exact same gear that we use. There's no kind of comparative advantage that we have. The advantage that we do have as pros are our reputations, and that's all that's the only thing that has value.
I think that's great. All right, Misha. Well, what is your Instagram? Where can people find you on social media?
My Instagram it's in deep borsh. So like in deep shit, but like in deep
There it is. Yeah.
In deep borsh. Yeah, it's a line from Police Academy. I actually had to get the account when I was doing started with the police book, and I was doing an Instagram takeover for the New Yorker, and I didn't have an Instagram account, so for this book I watched the Police Academy. I forget which one, but it was the one where they go to Russia in the late 80s, and one of the characters says, "We're in deep borscht." So that's a good handle. Yeah,
that's great. Well, I really appreciate it, Misha. Really great having you on as always. Thank you everybody for tuning in on Facebook. You can check us out also on Adorama TV's YouTube page. Thanks again to Adorama for letting us use the event space, to Canon Professional Services, to Temba Bags. You're all the best. And again, Misha, thanks again for stopping in.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you in a year about the Getty, all right?
And happy holidays.
All right, bye-bye.